Russia is pushing hard on Bakhmut, trying to make gains, but it's not just Santa Claus out in the airspace over Russia. Ukraine also had a few surprises for the Russians as well. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is December 26, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first and foremost, we're going to look at the ground control map, the territory map, and you can see the biggest changes are here near Optine, where you can see Russian forces have actually made a, for them, decent advance, seizing several I'll say streets of this village of Optine. It's a suburb south of Bakhmut, but as you guys can see, and as we've talked about, the ability to get a foothold in some of these urban areas, they're very strong defensively, and it can be very hard to dislodge a force that has set up proper defensive positions inside these urban areas, as we've seen from the past month, where Russian forces have struggled mightily to gain and maintain any foothold in these urban areas. But this is a significant piece of territory in Optine, and it almost certainly, if they have, up to 72 hours to set into these positions, it will be very hard for Russian forces to dislodge them. But that appears to be the only measurable advances, though we have a couple of small shifts in purportedly controlled territory to the east of Optine. When we look at the ground combat breakdown, you guys can see Russia has been very busy, right? This does not yet show the advances in Optine. The map has about to this line or so under Russian control. It also, of course, has a bit more Russian control here, where you can see Russia attacking Bakhmut from the east, trying to, of course, get over this natural obstacle in the form of this canal. What's also interesting, though, is that Russia has actually become more and more active in its efforts to seize Bakhmutsky, Yakovlivka, Vasile, and ultimately Soledar. If it can control Soledar, it can control at least two major roadways into and out of Bakhmut, though it's again worth noting that probably Ukrainian resupply is mostly coming in from Chasiv Yar and some on this MO3 highway. So even if Russia can seize this, it'll go a long way towards encircling Bakhmut, but it won't necessarily be cutting off the Ukrainians inside and fighting in Bakhmut itself. Now, let's talk about what's the real other part of the news. It seems to be developing in a strange way. First off, the Russian forces have reported that actually 3 of their military personnel were killed at Engels Air Base, an airbase deep inside Russian territory. And it is reported that Russian air defenses shot down a drone, presumably a Ukrainian drone, and that the debris killed 3 service members. Now, it's not inconceivable that the debris from a drone would kill 3 service members. Certainly, training accidents happen all the time. But what I think is interesting is there's actually video of this explosion at Engels Air Base. And I'll let you decide if you think this was debris falling from a drone or a successful drone strike. That is a significant explosion. Of course, it should be fairly apparent that the Engels Air Base is a launching point for airstrikes against Ukrainian targets. And this is very, very deep into Russian territory. In fact, one analyst pointed out that it is equidistant from the Ukrainian lines as Moscow. So just a brief reminder to the Kremlin that Ukraine can reach out and touch their air bases. It can also reach out and touch Moscow. What's more interesting as well is that there is Russian FSB has reported killing 4 armed men on the border with Ukraine's Bryansk region. And what I think is fascinating is that Russia has repeatedly tried to frame or is making increasing overtures to frame this conflict as existential to Russia. And obviously, when you look at a map, you realize the scale of Russia compared to the scale of Ukraine. It makes it fairly apparent that while this is an existential fight for the Ukrainian state, Russia is not in imminent danger of being taken over by Ukrainians. Far larger militaries than the Ukrainian armed forces have tried to take Russia and simply cannot do it. But Russia needs a pretext to increase its mobilization. It needs to actually make the case that there's an existential threat to their country in order to issue a general mobilization order. And this is, whoa, that's why I can't have nice things. So they need a pretext to issue a general mobilization order. Well, it seems like they're maybe trying to conjure that up by arguing that Ukrainian forces by the four are going to try to invade Russia and are posing an imminent threat to Russian citizens. Worth pointing out is that technically, this is also all part of Russia, liberated Ukraine. So it's not clear why Russia would need additional pretext to gin up the martial law they're going to need to declare a general mobilization in January. Now, all of this is, of course, at one other backdrop that I thought was really interesting. We're going to go over to Ground News. They've been a great sponsor of the channel. Of course, check the link in the description to check them out for free. They're really good about letting you see through kind of the mis and disinformation in a conflict like this to get at the truth. And there's two fascinating stories. Is that this is the first time, I believe, we've heard that Putin acknowledged that he's open to talks, where he says actually a recognition that, yes, this conflict will have a diplomatic solution. Now, sitting down for talks is a prerequisite, right? And as you can see, the Ukrainian foreign minister has said actually he too is open to talks in the February timeframe. Now, in order to reach a peace agreement, there must be talks, right? You cannot reach a peace agreement if both sides don't come to the table. But both sides being at the table, I want to emphasize, is not a requisite for a peace, or is not a condition that will necessarily lead to a peace agreement. If you look at the U.S. in Korean War or the U.S. war in Vietnam, you saw that those negotiations lasted years, and actually they intensified the conflict because both sides wanted to try to create conditions on the battlefield that were favorable to them. And they were, and when the war was going well for, let's say, the North Vietnamese, they were more conciliatory and more ready to negotiate than the U.S., who believed that they didn't have to negotiate until the war went in a good direction for them. And this ebb and flow is one of the things that's the belief that the future will always be better for your side and worse for the other side is one of the biggest problems around peace settlements. But it's worth noting that this is a light at the end of the tunnel. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Do be sure to check out Ground News. Also, if you want access to the uncensored combat video breakdowns, the kind that YouTube won't let me show you, you want to become a member of the Patreon. Thanks to my Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who make this possible. I'll see you all in the next one.